Politicians love to stand at podiums and proclaim that their trade policies are great for the American farmer. Donald Trump himself thundered, "I love the farmer. We will now be selling into our home market, the USA, because nobody is going to be able to compete with you." But let's pause right here and challenge that line. If American farmers are supposedly thriving, then why do real people, hard-working producers, report catastrophic financial losses? One farmer admitted he lost between $50,000 and $70,000 a year for 4 consecutive years under Trump's watch. Do the math. That's nearly $4 million down the drain. How is that winning for rural America? Soybeans, America's so-called green gold, were supposed to be the crown jewel of U.S. agriculture. Instead, they've been turned into dead weight, dragging farmers into debt and pushing entire communities to the edge of collapse. According to the American Soybean Association, U.S. farmers are missing out on billions in sales. Let's not sugarcoat it. In the second quarter of 2024, China spent over $3 billion on soybeans. This year, zero. Not a single dollar. If that's not economic betrayal, what is? By September 2025, Beijing hadn't placed a single new order. Compare that to just 1 year prior, when China bought 12 to 13 million tons. The silence from China isn't just noticeable, it's deafening. Numbers don't lie. U.S. soybean exports to China have collapsed by 77% after retaliatory tariffs. Futures prices have plunged nearly 40% from their 3-year high, forcing farmers to sell at a loss. And what's the result? Silos across the Midwest are overflowing with unsold beans, prices at rock-bottom levels, and families forced to watch their lifeline rot in storage. Yet Washington insists everything is under control. Really? If this is control, then what does chaos look like? Behind every statistic is a real human being. Farmers don't measure trade wars in charts or percentages. They measure it in overdue bills, in fields harvested at a loss, and in sleepless nights wondering if the family farm, often passed down through generations, will survive another season. Let's talk about cold, hard numbers. Soybean futures now hover around $10 a bushel, while the average cost of production sits at $11. That $1 gap might sound minor to city politicians, but multiply it across hundreds or thousands of acres, and you get a financial crater swallowing entire incomes. Take Caleb Ragland, president of the American Soybean Association. His own farm absorbed losses of roughly $750,000. That's not a number on a spreadsheet. That's a family business driven deeper into debt just to keep the lights on. And his story isn't unique. In 2024 alone, 216 family farms filed for bankruptcy, a 55% surge compared to the year before. These aren't isolated tragedies. This is a pattern. And what's fueling this nightmare? Not just market shifts, but the very policies that were supposedly designed to protect these farmers. Tariffs, tariffs, and more tariffs. An additional 10% duty pushed the total tariff rate to 20%. Pile on other levies, and the effective barrier soared to around 34%. So let's call it what it is. Washington's policies turned America's competitive advantage, cheap soybeans, into overpriced, unsellable crops. For China, the decision was easy. U.S. soybeans went from a bargain to a burden. Beijing didn't hesitate. They simply walked away, shutting off a trade lifeline that once sustained millions of acres. Sound familiar? It should. Between 2018 and 2020, U.S. agriculture absorbed losses of $26 to $27 billion, with soybeans alone carrying nearly $20 billion of that pain. Farmers still bear those scars. Now history isn't just repeating itself, it's coming back with even sharper teeth. While American farmers sink deeper into crisis, competitors like Brazil and Argentina are thriving. Washington drowns in tariff battles, while Beijing quietly redirects billions of dollars southward. Orders that once went to Iowa and Illinois now fuel prosperity in São Paulo and Buenos Aires. China even instructed its importers to stop buying U.S. soybeans entirely. That's not a market adjustment. That's a calculated shutdown. The numbers again scream the truth. In 2024, 71% of China's soybean imports came from Brazil, while just 20% came from the U.S., a reversal that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. And in 2025, the imbalance only deepened. Between January and July, China imported 42 million tons from Brazil, compared to a meager 16.5 million tons from the U.S. By October, South America was covering an astonishing 95% of China's monthly demand. So let's be blunt. While American farmers were promised protection, they were delivered betrayal. And while they struggle to stay afloat, South America is cashing in on Washington's blunders. Let's not mince words. The U.S. soybean crisis is not simply the result of bad luck or market fluctuations. It is the direct consequence of political choices. Tariffs, layer upon layer of them, were sold to the American people as a shield. Instead, they've become a noose. An extra 10% duty pushed tariffs on U.S. soybeans to 20%. And when you stack on additional levies, the effective barrier climbed to a staggering 34%. So here's the question nobody in Washington seems to ask. How can American farmers compete when their products are deliberately priced out of the global market by their own government's policies? For China, the math couldn't be clearer. U.S. soybeans transformed overnight from a cost-effective staple into an overpriced gamble. Why would Beijing continue buying from a partner who treats trade like a political weapon when cheaper stable suppliers exist just south of the equator? The result? The world's largest soybean buyer disappeared from America's order books by choice, and U.S. policymakers have only themselves to blame. This collapse isn't unprecedented. Between 2018 and 2020, U.S. agriculture ate losses of roughly $26 to $27 billion, with soybeans alone taking nearly $20 billion of that hit. Farmers remember those years as scars carved deep into the American heartland. But the current disaster is not just a repeat performance. It's the same storm, bigger, darker, and more unforgiving. Back then, recovery was hard but possible. Now, with fewer markets left and competitors entrenched, the chance of bouncing back looks slim to none. And while America stumbles, Brazil and Argentina are running victory laps. For decades, these countries watched U.S. dominance in soybeans with envy. Now, thanks to Washington's self-inflicted wounds, they don't have to envy anymore. They just cash the checks. The statistics are brutal. In 2024, about 71% of China's soybean imports came from Brazil, while only 20% came from the United States. Fast forward to 2025, from January to July, China imported over 42 million tons from Brazil and only 16.5 million tons from the U.S. By October, South America was covering 95% of China's monthly demand. Let that sink in. 95%. Brazil and Argentina aren't just filling the gap, they're locking the door behind them. And here's the ugly truth. Once China builds reliable, large-scale supply chains with South America, they won't simply switch back to the U.S. at the first sign of better relations. Markets don't work like light switches. Trust, reliability, and consistency matter, and America has squandered all three. Meanwhile, the crisis ripples far beyond soybean fields. Soybeans aren't just another crop. They are the backbone of jobs, trade balances, and regional economies. Analysts warn that if China continues its freeze until November, the U.S. could lose another 14 to 16 million tons of exports. That isn't just lost income. That's a chain reaction hitting truck drivers, port workers, processing plants, and local businesses that depend on steady flows of grain. Let's put some weight behind these numbers. Agriculture isn't a niche. It accounts for nearly 18.7% of U.S. GDP, or about $9.5 trillion when all related sectors are included. Within that massive machine, soybeans alone are tied to more than 231,000 American jobs. Every canceled contract isn't just a farmer's nightmare. It's a pink slip for a trucker, a reduced shift at a factory, or a closed business in a small town. History already showed us the danger. In a previous trade war cycle, soybean-related damages devoured close to $20 billion. A repeat at today's scale isn't just about dollars. It's about bankruptcies wiping out family farms, unemployment hollowing out towns, and political unrest boiling in the heartland. When rural America starts to crumble, the fallout doesn't stay rural. It seeps into national politics, fueling anger, division, and instability. And let's not ignore how other countries are adapting in ways Washington refuses to. Take Canada. Unlike the U.S., it doesn't pretend to be a soybean superpower. Canadian production is modest compared to America's vast scale. But instead of chasing impossible volumes, Ottawa asked a smarter question. How can a small producer survive in a world where markets flip overnight? Their answer was pragmatic: resilience. The Canadian government expanded agri-stability to cover up to 90% of losses, ensuring family farms wouldn't collapse from sudden shocks. They injected an additional $1 billion Canadian dollars in credit facilities, giving farmers breathing room to refinance, invest, and adapt without drowning in interest payments. That's not charity, it's strategy. It reassures farmers that the system won't abandon them mid-crisis. And Canada didn't stop at protection. They redefined their competitive edge. Instead of chasing bulk commodity exports, they focused on high-margin niches: premium pork for Asian markets, specialized pulses for health-conscious Europeans, and branded processed foods carrying the halo of Canadian safety standards. In other words, they embedded value into their exports, insulating themselves from the wild swings of commodity prices. This contrast couldn't be sharper. While Washington doubles down on tariffs and trade wars, Canada builds resilience and sustainability. While U.S. farmers are forced into bankruptcy, Canadian farmers are given the tools to adapt. Which model looks smarter? Which model looks like it belongs to a nation serious about protecting its people? America loves to talk about greatness, but when its policies crush its own farmers while competitors thrive, isn't it time to admit that something is fundamentally broken? When markets collapse, what does Washington do? It reaches for the same worn-out playbook: write a bigger check. The Trump administration, true to form, leaned heavily on subsidies and aid packages as if throwing taxpayer money at the problem could somehow substitute for a functioning trade policy. In July 2025, the administration approved a $65 billion program stretched over the next decade, aimed at crop insurance and direct farm support. Agriculture Secretary Rollins promised that $10 billion would flow immediately into farmers' accounts. On paper, this looks generous, almost heroic. But peel back the layers and it becomes obvious. These payouts are little more than bandages slapped on a wound that keeps reopening. Ask the American Soybean Association. Its leaders are crystal clear. No subsidy can replace lost access to China. Checks from Washington may keep the lights on for another season, but they don't rebuild export markets, they don't restore trust, and they certainly don't erase the fact that competitors are now entrenched in places the U.S. once dominated. Aid is temporary oxygen. What farmers need is a market that breathes on its own. And here's the brutal reality. Farmers know this. They've seen this movie before. During the previous trade war, more than $23 billion was funneled into emergency relief. It was necessary, yes, but ask those who lived through it, and many will tell you it was never enough. They still carry the debt. They still remember watching silos overflow while foreign buyers shifted permanently to new suppliers. Relief packages don't bring markets back. They just delay the inevitable reckoning. So why recycle the same failed strategy? Because it's politically convenient. Announce a big number, sign a check, and call it support. It looks strong on a podium, but it's weak in reality. It's governing with optics instead of outcomes. And while Washington pats itself on the back, farmers are forced to ask, how many more years can we survive like this? Soybeans as a mirror of power. At this point, soybeans are no longer just an agricultural story. They're a mirror reflecting the erosion of American power. Once, they were a tool of economic diplomacy, a humble grain that carried U.S. influence into Beijing's negotiating rooms. Soybeans symbolized leverage. Washington believed that because China needed American soybeans, it could flex its muscle on the global stage. That illusion has shattered. Today, soybeans stand as a reminder of how fragile that leverage really was. China has not only proven it can walk away from the U.S., it has done so decisively, redirecting billions of dollars to South America. And the uncomfortable truth is this: Beijing didn't just cut ties for the sake of price. It cut ties to reduce political vulnerability. Why allow Washington to weaponize food supply? Why allow soybeans to be used as a bargaining chip? By pivoting southward, China turned what once looked like U.S. strength into glaring weakness. And here lies the deeper danger. This isn't just about soybeans. If the U.S. could lose its grip on green gold, what else could slip away? Corn, wheat, beef, dairy. Every agricultural product is now viewed by foreign buyers through a lens of caution. If Washington can weaponize soybeans, what's stopping it from weaponizing everything else? Buyers who once trusted America are now asking themselves if that trust was misplaced. Rural America on the edge. For farmers, this crisis isn't abstract. It's existential. Bankruptcy numbers prove it. In 2024 alone, 216 family farms went under, a 55% increase in a single year. Rising interest rates magnify the pain. Input costs for fertilizer, fuel, and machinery have soared, thanks in part to tariffs on steel, aluminum, and potash. Farmers are being crushed from both sides. Shrinking revenues on one hand, escalating expenses on the other. This isn't erosion of profit margins, it's erosion of hope. Generations-old farms, once symbols of American resilience, are being downsized, leased out, or abandoned altogether. The sight of empty barns and auction signs isn't just economic decay, it's cultural collapse. Rural towns built around agriculture are hollowing out, depopulated and demoralized. Political resentment simmers beneath the surface, feeding the flames of division. Washington's choices don't just hurt pocketbooks, they destabilize communities. And yet, the response from leadership remains predictable. Deny, deflect, and double down. Farmers are told to be patient, to endure, to believe in promises of better deals around the corner. But patience doesn't pay overdue bills, faith doesn't refinance loans, and vague promises won't save a business that has already gone bankrupt. Competitors lock the door. Meanwhile, the rest of the world isn't waiting for America to get its act together. Brazil and Argentina are cementing their dominance. In 2024, they already captured 71% of China's soybean imports. By 2025, they delivered 42 million tons compared to America's meager 16.5 million. And by October, they were supplying 95% of China's monthly demand. These numbers aren't temporary spikes. They're the new normal. Once supply chains are built, once contracts are signed, and once trust is established, markets rarely shift back. China has no incentive to return to an unreliable partner. And let's be blunt, why would they? South America can deliver without political drama, without tariffs, and without the looming threat of weaponized trade. The U.S. is learning a painful lesson. When you walk away from a buyer, don't expect them to wait for you. Another supplier will step in, and when they do, they'll slam the door shut behind them. Canada's counterexample contrasts this with Canada, which has approached the trade war era with pragmatism rather than bravado. Instead of pretending to compete with America in volume, Canada built resilience through smarter policy, expanding agri-stability to cover 90% of losses and opening $1 billion in credit facilities gave Canadian farmers breathing space. More importantly, Canada pivoted away from bulk commodities toward high-margin niches. Premium pork, specialty pulses, and branded foods backed by Canadian safety standards. Canada understood what Washington still refuses to admit. In an age of trade wars, flexibility beats scale. Protection alone isn't enough. You need adaptability. While America doubles down on subsidies, Canada is building long-term competitiveness. Which nation looks more prepared for the future? The answer should sting. The political reckoning. Let's not kid ourselves. This soybean disaster is more than an economic failure. It's a political one. Rural America, once the backbone of Trump's political base, is shouldering the heaviest burden of his policies. The very farmers who cheered promises of protection are now filing for bankruptcy in record numbers. What happens when loyalty turns to disillusionment? What happens when slogans can't feed families? Political unrest doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It festers in neglected communities. Bankrupt farms, shuttered businesses, and hollowed-out towns are fertile ground for anger. And when that anger meets broken promises, it doesn't quietly fade. It explodes. Washington is playing with fire, and the consequences won't stay confined to soybean fields. The larger question, the warning is clear. America's so-called green gold is slipping away, and with it, a chunk of U.S. economic and diplomatic leverage. The stakes are bigger than soybeans. This crisis forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. If even soybeans, a crop that once guaranteed U.S. dominance, can be lost, what else could follow? If China can pivot so decisively, what's to stop other nations from doing the same in other sectors? And if America keeps substituting subsidies for strategy, will it retreat further from global economic leadership? The U.S. loves to call itself a leader, but leadership is earned, not assumed. It's built on trust, reliability, and smart strategy. Right now, America is bleeding all three. Farmers know it, competitors know it, and the world knows it. Conclusion. A reckoning. Long overdue soybeans were once a symbol of American strength, a humble grain that fed both stomachs and diplomacy. Now they are a symbol of decline, of arrogance, of policies that put politics above people. Washington can keep writing checks, but no subsidy will erase the truth. The U.S. has lost ground, lost credibility, and lost the trust of its biggest buyers. The collapse of soybeans is not just an agricultural story. It's a warning shot. If America can't protect its farmers, if it can't secure its markets, and if it can't adapt to a world that moves on without it, then the erosion we see today may only be the beginning of a longer retreat from global leadership. And the haunting question remains, if even soybeans can slip through America's fingers, what else is next? Is next? Is next? Is next?